Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen have produced some amazing fighting chess in their games, and their encounter in round 6 of the London Chess Classic certainly lived up to expectations. So Hikaru with the white pieces, he's not playing La Spanish or a Giocopiano with more traditional strategy. He's gone for a Scotch. So and this line that the players have gone into, although it's been seen for, well, a couple of hundred years, in fact, it reaches very unusual positions right from the word go. So clearly both players spoiling for a fight. Queens in odd positions, blocking the king's bishop. But yeah, hundreds of games have been played from this point, and c4, driving the knight back to b6, is the standard continuation. But Hikaru, he played h4. I have to admire Hikaru's fighting spirit, in spite of the huge plus score that Magnus has against Hikaru. Hikaru isn't afraid to go for him, which is fantastic for us. And often he gets good positions, but Magnus somehow often slips out. But h4, already this is a bit wild and wacky. This is a speciality of Alexander Morozevich and Jan Nepomniachtchi, two Russian players who often play pretty wacky stuff. In fact, Nepomniachtchi played this against Wesley So in Leuven a little bit earlier in the year. And Wesley played d6, and, well, the game went into an endgame pretty quickly, which must be okay for black. But Magnus, well, he was obviously spoiling for a fight and just developed his bishop and kept more tension, which seemed to throw Hikaru a little bit. It is a slightly unusual move. Looks very standard, but hasn't been played very often. c4 played, and the knight went back to b6, and now we can see one of the secondary points of h4. Of course, one of the ideas is playing bishop g5, but the other is to bring this rook into the game very quickly, maybe swinging all the way across here, who knows. Could be going to e3 as well. So we've got a wild and wacky position on our hands. Queen e6 played to avoid anything with bishop g5. And now, knight c3 looks like a pretty standard move. At some moment you have to bring your pieces out. But no, Hikaru played f4. So he's only playing with his pawns. Magnus castled, ready to break open the position. So he's getting developed. And now, again, Hikaru just played with his pawns. If you were going to show a beginner this game, you would be wagging your finger and saying, White has played really badly. Never bring your rooks out at the side of the board. Never make too many pawn moves in the game. Bring your pieces out. You can go on and on. I just thought this was absolutely daft. Here d6 is a reasonable move. After just over 15 minutes thought, Magnus played d5, which looks really strong, breaking through in the centre while this king is now stranded basically. But it's not that clear. A5 played, and now, well, Magnus took on c4 after not much reflection. Could bring the knight back. And then we have an absolutely ludicrous position. This is just really, really double-edged. Something like this could happen. This is just so wacky. Completely unclear. So that's possible, but... this position. But Magnus took on c4, which doesn't look bad, does it? But now, a very forcing sequence of moves. b3, and you can see that, sort of out of the blue, this knight is trapped. But it's not so clear. Bishop b4 check. So obviously if it's the check is blocked, then the knight is saved, and there's also possible to take on a5. So king f2 played. Now, well, I'm attending the tournament, doing some commentary, but I was on a little break, and I was having a chat with Henrik, Magnus's father, who was saying, it's a draw, it's a draw, it's a forced draw. Of course, he was looking at some computer online that was giving an extraordinary variation. So, well, here Magnus took on a5, but incredibly, after bishop c5 check, the best continuation for both sides is to force a draw like this. But let me show you what happens if after bishop c5 check, the white king goes to g3. At first it looks as though, you know, white is doing really well here because the king is going to come back to h2 and the knight is trapped. But watch this unbelievable variation. This is the line that Magnus's father had seen demonstrated by this computer. First of all, bishop g1. Now, this is great stuff. So preventing the king coming back to safety. Okay, white throws in a6 and the bishop drops back to a8. Now we take on c4. So white is now a pawn up, a piece up. Now at the moment, if you give a check, if you try to hassle the king, then queen g4 is check, will force an exchange of queens. So black plays h5. So preventing the white queen blocking. And now queen g6 check, and when the king goes to f3, queen g4 is mate. So this is a serious threat. So rook h1, I mean, an incredible move in itself, giving the king some room. Queen g6 check. Now, as before, if the king goes here, then that's a very sweet checkmate. So king h3, queen f5 check. And this is now a forced draw. The king should go to g3 and queen g6 and so on. So the question is, what would happen after queen f5 check? What happens after g4? Well, this is actually a mistake because now you take, and if queen takes, we take here. I mean, this is wonderful. Here we give a check with the bishop, king back, check, and queen takes queen. We win the queen. Or in this position, if king g3, then bishop d4. That's a cool move. So we attack the rook, and if the rook moves, then we snaffle the knight with the queen. And if bishop b2, we take, and now, well, white is still a piece up, but this move, g5, just detonates white's king position. You can see that, however this is taken, this is absolutely dreadful. Or h takes, then rook takes rook. I mean, this is a really crucial variation, actually. I mean, it's just quite extraordinary. So bishop c5 check. I mean, I wouldn't have minded a draw after king g3 and bishop g1. I mean, that would be amazing. But Magnus played knight takes a5. Not an easy variation to spot with bishop g1, it has to be said, and h5. He took on a5, and incredibly, after bishop d2, white is actually fine, more than fine. Well, first of all, if this is exchanged off, then the knight is trapped. So c5. But now rook takes a5, and suddenly, actually, white has reasonable coordination. White has two pieces against a rook, and the king is relatively safe here. Pops back on g1. These pieces are not badly placed at all, and if anything, Magnus has to be very careful here. Now I'm going to zip through these next moves fairly quickly. Both sides played pretty well, but round about here it's clear that Nakamura is actually taking control of the game. He's now a piece up. Black has 3 pawns for the piece, but this is a difficult position. This pawn attacked, and after rook d7, bishop d3, Magnus admitted after the game that he'd overlooked this move. Threatens bishop f5 with a fatal pin, and also threatens the h-pawn. So suddenly, white is for choice here. So what Magnus has to do is just try to eliminate as many pawns as possible. If g6, then rook f6 takes control, It's going to snaffle the a pawn. So king d8. This was taken, and g6, but of course this bishop gets out very easily. It's still 3 pawns for the piece, but well, black's pawns look really ragged now, and this rook is in a superb position on f6. Let me zip through the next few moves. Basically, Magnus really can't improve his play here. White is just in control. You can see he's just trying to exchange off as many pawns as possible and try to get down to a draw. But, this is horrible. Every single one of black's pawns split. And white has good coordination. Pieces stand excellently. So Magnus trying at least to trade pieces. Pushing this pawn. And we reached this position. So the game has finally settled. And this should be winning for white. He's got reasonable control. Now, in order to win, somehow white needs to round up this pawn. Of course, it's not so easy when black can try and get at the g-pawn with rook, pawn, king. I'm going to go a few moves ahead, because this is a very long game. So I'm going to this position. Well, let me show you how we got here. So I may as well play through these moves very quickly. So Hikaru actually playing pretty well around here. He's basically playing absolutely solidly. The trick is not to rush. He's taking his time. Clearly wasn't exactly sure what to do, but there is no harm in just maneuvering, trying to get a little advantage with your pieces. Don't rush it. Here he played rook a2. This is crunch moment. Rook a5 check is a winning move. There's probably many moves that win. After king d4, knight here. Black's problem is that this pawn is going to drop, but also the knight can come back to take that pawn. So, for example, here, there's even a threat to play rook d5 mate in this position. So rook back, and now, typical trick. After king d3, you play rook a3, exchange off everything here, and the king and pawn endgame is winning. Or king c4, and once again rook a3, and there's going to be a terrible check on c3. Or if after the check the king goes back, let's say king here, now the rook can come back. And once again, simple threat of playing knight e2, and finally white gets there. But I think Hikaru had been swirling around with rook and knight for so long that, of course this is a very long game, and actually he's still winning, but now it's getting more and more tricky. It's very tricky indeed, because somehow white has lost a bit of control here. And here, this was the last chance. Rook a3, still probably a win for white, but this is now very, very difficult. Rook takes f5, played by Hikaru. You might think this is winning, but actually this is an excellent move. This prevents white's king coming across to take the pawn for all time. And now the black king and rook can hassle that knight, and this is now a forced draw. It was incredible seeing the emotions of the players. They're sitting on the board, Hikaru shaking his head, pretty distraught, couldn't believe that he'd messed up this endgame. Let me just take you through the final few moves. And Magnus looking mightily relieved. I have to say, after the game, Magnus was actually very generous towards Hikaru. He said, Hikaru, really outplayed him, played excellently. He did, but somehow just didn't have the technique at the end to clinch the game. But yeah, another Another incredible escape by Magnus Carlsen against Hikaru Nakamura, and somehow Hikaru just has a kind of psychological block when it comes to playing Magnus. So, after 6 rounds, at the London Chess Classic, Fabiano Caruana is still in the lead. 3 rounds to go. Magnus is still in with a shout, as are many other players in the tournament. Magnus has 2 white still to go in the tournament, and he plays against Michael Adams in round 7. So I think it's going to be a grandstand finish.